Everything happened in a dark room of a terrible building. It was a room where interrogations and tortures were carried out, and that's where the main character was brought. The recording started and everything was blue so that he could start talking, speak, and besides, he didn't understand why his words were being recorded. There were many people in the building who were watching him and believed that the recording was really necessary. After all, they wanted the descendants to know who they were and how they all managed to survive. The main character didn't dare to start. However, he took a deep breath and dared to do it. After saying hello, Sung-ho-yoon began to tell that just now, he, together with his friends, were trying to find their relatives. They promised to shoot a video as long as it depends on the living and hope that they can return alive. Before the terrible disaster happened, no one believed that monsters were real. All people lived an ordinary life. The main character was a schoolboy. For many years, he played in a sports team that he really liked. In addition, he was a very talented player and a good athlete. But that day, his opponents were the former basketball team. The guys who were there were many years older than them to be stronger. But this did not scare Seong-ho-yoon at all, and he did not think of giving up. Moreover, others supported him because they knew that he could beat the whole team by himself. No one doubted that it was thanks to him that the team would be able to win. So as soon as he started playing, their score immediately increased and they became winners. But his life changed. Seong-ho-yoon quit baseball and was only a fan of all other games. No one understood why he quit sports, but it seemed that he himself did not have an answer to this question. But when he quit the team, they began to consider him a traitor and wanted to take revenge for this act. Suddenly, a bottle flew right into his face. It was so unexpected and painful that he fell to the floor. It was Sojin Han, who had also played on his team in the past. The girl got angry with him because he left the team just before a serious game. Now they had no chance of winning. She even wanted to hit him. He was lucky that Sojin Han missed because the blow was quite strong. However, after that, she didn't stop and continued to mock him in front of everyone. Sojin Han was a winner and a karate master, so she was able to easily handle him. Still, she risked strangling him, so she just let him go. As he fell, he caught on the table and all the food spilled out right on him. At that moment, the guy looked very funny, so they started recording him on video. After what happened, Seong-ho-yoon wanted to get away. So, in the evening, he went to the shooting range to have some fun. He tried to release his anger and imagined Sojin Han in the place of the targets. Sung-ho-yoon was so skilled that he managed to reach the final level without even taking any damage. His friend even suggested that he could make money from it, because he could film everything. But Sung-ho-yoon didn't listen to him and tried to beat his previous record. And again, he managed to get first place and earn even more points. Suddenly, he felt a strange look on him and realized that something was wrong. The whole time, another unknown guy was watching him. There was something wrong with his face. It seemed he was sick. But his friend didn't see anything strange on his face. It seemed Sung-ho-yoon had outplayed him. Sung-ho-yoon looked at him again, but realized that now everything was fine and the guy didn't seem suspicious. He decided not to pay attention to it. But the suspicious guy didn't take his eyes off the main character. He really felt bad, so he decided to find a toilet. The guy understood that something strange was happening to him. But what happened? The main character didn't give him peace. Why did he also start looking at him and get so scared when he saw his face? Suddenly, he noticed how the wrinkles on his face began to move. After that, he became very pale and the skin on his face began to tear. Now, he could not hold back and screamed in pain. All the time, a terrible monster had been living inside him, which was now trying to break out. This terrible creature resembled a spider, but very huge. The creature was able to climb walls and just now started leaving the room. His friend started to get nervous because he had been gone for so long, so he decided to check what had happened. But when he entered the room and saw him lying still in a pool of his own blood, he almost lost consciousness. The guy was even afraid to touch him and couldn't understand what had happened. He tried to call the police, but his hands were shaking. It was scary. Suddenly, he noticed that a strange drop had fallen on his shoulder. The monster, who was right above him, was about to attack the guy. He tried to escape, but it was too late, and now the same fate awaited him. Because the monster started attacking him, the mutant was trying to get into his body and take over it. Now that the monster had chosen a new body for itself, it started cleaning up the traces of the crime. He hid his victim's body in the closet so that no one would find it. He closed the door tightly and checked for any traces. Now, the boy could go. Everything was ready. It seemed that the boy remained conscious the whole time because he could speak calmly and behave like a normal person. The monster could only sometimes take control of his body and do what it wanted. The next day, Sung-ho-yoon hurried to school. But there was a huge scar on his body that he tried to hide. Because of him, he was late, because it was very difficult to get dressed. He should have followed his sister's example and gone to school earlier so as not to be late. However, he noticed that his mother was very sad. She could barely contain herself and hardly spoke. Today was the year since his father died, so they were supposed to have dinner tonight. It was the worst day of his life. In addition, his mother was so upset that she completely forgot about her own work and started to be late. On the way to school, Sojin Han was bothering him again. The girl wrote him many messages, but she never received a reply to any of them. She was worried about him, but thought that the boy had fallen ill because he looked so bad. In addition, she was very angry with him because he did not listen to her and did not pay attention. Suddenly, he noticed a familiar face in one of the carriages. The unpleasant feeling began to haunt him again. It seemed to him that someone was following him. When he grabbed Sojin Han by the hand, she did not understand anything. Now, he noticed a suspicious guy whose face was very strange. But why did all the people around him remain so calm? Yesterday, he managed to see the same thing, and did the others not see it? Suddenly, he felt very sick, and his eyes began to fill with blood. Seungho began to vomit blood, and the others could not understand what was happening to him. The mutant that had taken up residence in his body tried to leave him and escape to the surface. Now, his dead body was lying on the train, and the monster had climbed to the surface. Panic began, and no one dared to approach him. Seungho's body was torn apart. The entire carriage was covered in his blood. But the monster seemed to be aggressive. He began to prepare to attack. He squeezed her hand tighter and didn't want to let go. Sojin Han had never been so scared before. No one knew what it was, but it was obvious that they had to run away. Suddenly, other people also started vomiting and the monsters were leaving their bodies. No one could survive after this, so the people who were inhabited by the mutant died immediately. Now, there were so many mutants that all people were doomed. They began to attack them and tried to find new bodies for themselves. One of them inhabited a man right in front of the others. Now, all the people began to run away, trying to save their own lives. A real panic and a stampede began, in which they hit the main character. Sojin Han tried to help him and lost her guard. At that moment, her body was about to be hit by a terrible monster. Now it was clear that she was doomed. After that, the monster tried to attack the guy too. He tried to get into his mouth and climb inside. Despite the fact that he resisted, the monster could not be stopped. He tried to call for help, but no one would come. Suddenly, he realized that it was all a vision, like a terrible dream that he had seen. Now he realized that if people did not leave the train, they would all die. But how could he make people obey him to save their lives? It was obvious that they had to run away, right now. No one expected that monster could be so dangerous and started taking pictures of him. And at that moment, his visions began to come true, because another boy also felt sick. Monster tore off his head and tried to find a new victim for himself. But no one was in a hurry to run away. They did not even expect that this could be the biggest mistake in their lives. 3 people had already died from mutants, and now a lot of people began to panic. A firefighter who had a medical degree decided to examine the victims. He tried to understand what had happened to the people and establish the cause of death. But as soon as he approached the dead body, he realized that his heart was beating. He ordered all the people to stay in their places until the ambulance arrived. They wanted to try to catch the mutants in order to give them for examination. But Seungho Yoon tried to stop them and convince them that they needed to stay as far away from the mutants as possible. But the doctor did not listen to him and only accused him of scaring people into panicking. At that moment, Monster was about to attack him. He attacked him with his tentacles and penetrated his own husband right into his mouth. After that, Monster tried to get inside his body. Despite the fact that the guy managed, he could not stop him because he was inside and began to tear his internal organs and skin. Now everyone finally understood that this was not something to joke about and tried to escape. But the main character understood that it was too late because everything was happening exactly as it was in his vision. Monsters began to attack people who could not escape from them and leave the train car. A lot of young people died at the same time because the monsters tore their bodies apart and no one could stop it. Mutants got through different parts of the body: nose, ears, eyes, or mouth. Once inside, because I was trying to escape, you simply tore apart the human body. It became obvious that mutants could control the human mind, and even take control of the body because the people who remained alive understood that they could not control their actions. Trying to stop it, they tried to jump out of the window to end the suffering. Sojin Han could not believe that all this was really happening, and it seemed like it was just a bad dream. She lost her guard and did not notice how the mutant managed to get close to her. It was just at that moment that he was going to attack her. But the main character knew what would happen and was nearby. He managed to save her and protect her from certain death. But the mutants were not going to stop after that. They were preparing for another attack and were just waiting for their victim to approach them. Now Seungho Yoon understood that it was necessary to fight them and try to defend himself. From his vision, he knew that it was too late to try to escape now. The monster began to attack him, but he tried to defend himself. The metal mesh that was in his hands could not withstand such a strong blow and broke. He had no other choice, and now, when he tried to injure him with a sharp metal object, Sung-ho-yun was able to pierce the mutant's body and cause him a serious injury. There was blood on his face and body. And yet, he managed to defeat and kill the monster. However, this was not enough, because other mutants also started attacking him. Now the mutant grabbed him by the neck and began to strangle Seong-ho-yun. Sojin-han wanted to help him, but she could not do anything. Sung-ho-yun began to suffocate. The mutant grabbed him so hard that he almost broke his neck. The mutant tried to get into his body and was just about to do it through his eyes at that moment. But at the last moment, Essie Sojin-han appeared, who stabbed the monster and saved his life. She continued stabbing him until she was sure that the monster was dead. His dead and bloody body was still lying on the ground. Since Sojin-han wanted to protect the guy, he could hide behind her back. Sung-ho-yun was grateful to her for saving him. After all, if she hadn't made it, he would have already been dead. Suddenly, he realized that smoke began to come from the monster's body. It dried up and started to burn. But what was really happening? The same thing happened to all the mutants who were in the car and were killing people. And the people who had mutants in them fell to the ground and were dead. They were all dead and stopped moving. It seemed that people were lucky and managed to escape. Suddenly, the train started to stop. No one expected that the stop would be so abrupt, so they started to fall to the ground. It seemed that something unexpected had happened because it was too far to the stop. All the people who managed to survive in the car tried to understand what had happened and why the train had stopped so suddenly. However, it was very noisy outside, and now it was very dangerous to leave the train. A catastrophe had occurred. There were fires and smoke all over the city. It seemed that some kind of huge catastrophe had occurred. An incomprehensible object appeared in the sky, similar to a space rock. The military and rescuers were trying to stop the panic in the city and overcome the threat. Monsters were on the streets and attacking people. There were many corpses and dead bodies. Everyone started running away, trying to save their own lives. The main character got off the train and saw all the horror that was happening on the streets of the city. There was real hell on the streets, and what were these terrible mutants? It was safe in other areas of the city where the mutants couldn't get to. It looked like a comic book ship, and there were a lot of them all over the city. No one could believe that everything was really happening. It seemed like they were filming a movie, and what was in the sky didn't look like planes at all. Had a war really started, and was it a new weapon? Suddenly, one of the men started to be torn apart by the mutant inside him. Now the danger reached even there. The mutant immediately started attacking other people. There were bloodstains on the windows of the car, and people couldn't understand what had happened inside. The mutant controlled it with his body and pressed the gas pedal. The car started to drive into a crowd of people. There was a loud explosion. The car caught fire, and all the people who were nearby died. A fire broke out in the city. People were scared and tried to escape. After some time, the connection was lost. The phones did not work, and no one answered. Suddenly, the monsters began to attack even people from the crowd. It was not clear how they got inside the body. However, now the parasites were looking for new hosts for themselves. No one dared to approach the dead woman. It was very scary to approach the parasite. There were a lot of monsters. Now they were everywhere. Suddenly, they began to attack people who did not even suspect anything and did not have time to escape. They were all doomed and would soon die. Those who were lucky enough to remain standing realized that they had to flee. In panic, they started pushing each other. There were many accidents. Cars were running people over, crashing into each other and exploding. A real apocalypse began. The whole city was on fire. There was real horror in the city. Many people were dying. Those who managed to survive tried to hide in their houses and not go out. They tried to wait until the rescuers arrived and helped them. However, many did not agree to just sit and do nothing. It was necessary to help the victims. They started to argue, and in such a difficult situation, it would be worth uniting. The boy had a vision in his head again. He knew that everyone who stayed here would soon die. After all, he had seen everything, even how the monsters penetrated their bodies. But how did he know that everything would happen exactly like this? Besides, in his vision, he died. But in reality, he remained alive. Seong-ho-yun did not believe that he could see the future. The connection never appeared, so they could not contact their own parents. Sung-ho-yun tried to leave a message in the family chat and prayed for an answer. People continued to argue. They couldn't decide what to do with the injured people and how to save them. There was a doctor in the crowd who couldn't understand how the parasites could get inside the people. The people were infected. The spores got into their bodies and started to develop and infect others. The doctor was sure that the parasites were using people as carriers. It seemed that the infection couldn't spread through the air. The parasites entered through the mouth or other parts of the body. It was an incomprehensible infection, and it was obvious that a new wave might appear soon, and the monsters would come back to life. Many disagreed with him and considered him a liar. It seemed that the doctor was deliberately trying to scare people, and the panic became even greater. In front of them was Beomjun Kim, a biology professor at one of the best universities in the country. They decided to move the people to one place where it was safe and lock them up there. Despite the fact that the bodies were cold, the people were making strange sounds, which meant they were alive. There were much more people than Beomjun Kim had thought at once, and they couldn't all fit in one room. Sojin Han also wanted to help him. She went forward and tried to help the professor, but Seong-ho Yoon tried to stop her. It seemed that no one understood what he knew. All the bodies were no longer people. They couldn't be helped. Now they approached the body of a man who was making strange sounds. They didn't know what to do with him or how to help him. Seong-ho Yoon tried to call her because it was very dangerous to be near him. However, she didn't listen to him and didn't even intend to go anywhere. He believed that they were no longer human because their brains were controlled by a virus. Suddenly, she heard a terrible scream. The girl who was sitting next to her started screaming and pointing at her hand. The boy, who had not shown any signs of life before, suddenly came to life and tried to bite her. At the last moment, she managed to jump away from him so the mutant couldn't get into her body. Now the parasite began to control his dead body and move the boy's head. His neck twisted very hard and squeezed. His head was about to come off his body. Something started to crawl out of his head. The same parasite. It seemed that he was trying to break away from his body and take his head. The skin on his neck started to tear. A lot of blood appeared. Now the mutant managed to break away and the monster started to attack the others. People in panic started to run away and tried to get to another car. However, Sojin Han did not have time to escape and found herself in danger. She cried, but she knew that she would not be able to save herself. Just at that moment, the parasite was about to attack her and jumped right at her. Seong-ho Yoon saw what was happening. He screamed, but the girl was able to defend herself at the last moment. Seong-ho Yoon understood that he couldn't just stand there and he needed some kind of weapon. There was a wooden stick at hand. It was the only thing he could use. There was no need to delay because soon her strength would run out. Just at that moment, the parasite was trying to get into her body. It extended its tentacles and tried to get in through its mouth. Seong-ho Yoon decided to act because there was no time to delay. With all his strength, he hit the parasite with the wooden stick. The blow was so strong that the parasite flew to the other end of the car, and Sojin Han could not come to her senses because she would have died in an instant. Despite the strong blow, the mutant remained alive. It seemed that he was not going to stop and began to attack the main character again. But Seong-ho Yoon was not so easy to scare, and he would not leave his girlfriend for any reason. The guy struck again with a strong blow. It seemed that this should have killed him, but even after that, the parasite remained alive. The guy continued to beat him until he could hold the bat in his hands. It seemed that he damaged his hand and injured himself. After all, his arm hurt so much that it seemed like it could fall off. Sojin Han screamed at him because the mutant didn't die. Just at that moment, another monster tried to attack him. Now, he was able to bite the main character right on the shoulder. And gradually, through the wound, he began to penetrate his arm, trying to take over his body. Now the parasite was inside him. The parasite was inside him, and was Seong-ho Yoon really going to die like that? Out of despair, he started screaming. Suddenly, out of nowhere, a professor appeared who didn't run away with other people. He was going to save him and tried to kill the mutant and stabbed him with a metal stick. Even after such a strong blow, he remained alive. The professor tried to kill him, but these creatures were very tenacious. With all his strength, he kicked him and tried to crush him. Only when he crushed his skull did the mutant die and stop moving. The parasites controlled the brain, so in order to stop them, it was necessary to crush his head. He tried to calm people down, because in order to fight them, you need to be calm. You couldn't run away, so you had to try to destroy the mutants. Everyone gathered in one place and tried to catch them. Seong-ho Yoon had badly damaged his arm. He had many fractures and wounds. In addition, he couldn't control it because there was a parasite inside. Suddenly, he realized that the parasite was trying to reach his head, and at that moment, it became difficult for him to breathe. The professor was behind him and wanted to help. He had to press the guy's head to the ground. He had a knife in his hands. It seemed like he was going to forcefully get the parasite out. Beomjun Kim didn't answer and remained very calm the whole time. He really wanted to help him. He was going to pull him out until he reached the brain. Now he was going to perform the operation and bandaged his arm. He was very worried about the bleeding. However, it was very important to stop the bleeding now. Beomjun Kim warned that it would be very painful, so he had to endure this torment. The doctor started cutting his arm, trying to save his life. Seong-ho Yoon started screaming because the pain was unbearable. He couldn't stand it, so he ordered the man to stop. The doctor ordered the girl to hold his legs because if the hero didn't stop moving, he wouldn't be able to save him. Sojin Han held him and tried to calm him down. The boy endured, but he was in a lot of pain. He didn't understand why he had to suffer so much. Suddenly, he saw a strange vision. The boy saw a strange hand and couldn't understand what was happening. He almost lost consciousness, and the doctor wanted to bring him back to consciousness. When he came to, he tried to understand what had happened to him. He couldn't be put to sleep, because if he did it again, he would definitely die. So Sojin Han was so scared for him that she started crying and was ready to endure all the pain for him. Still, the doctor was able to save him. The parasite that was managed to get was in a bottle of water. But the doctor did not know whether the guy would be able to fully recover after that. He hoped that nothing was left in him. The infection did not have time to spread throughout the body. The professor had never met such a parasite before. It was different in its structure and it was not easy to get it. Suddenly, the main character saw a vision again and realized that time was running out. Meanwhile, having united, people were finally able to stop the mutant and crush him. In addition, they could not believe that before it was living people who became infected so suddenly. If you believe the professor's words, then mutants should be those people who have also been infected with the parasite. Now, they had to keep a distance from each other and were in quarantine. The main character got to his feet and tried to convince people that they could not be in the car all the time. They had to go because if they got stuck, they would be doomed to certain death. No one listened to him, but in any case, he was going to go and invited everyone who wanted to go with him. But they saw Kiho created on the streets of the city, so they decided that it was much safer in the train car. Suddenly, the first person who wanted to go with him appeared. It was a girl who believed him and was convinced that it was necessary to look for rescuers. After all, the connection never appeared, so they had to get to a safe place on their own. Before leaving, they were going to take everything they needed with them. They had to move along the track, but it was much narrower than it seemed at first glance. The main character's hand hurt a lot, so he needed help to get down. And those who remained on the train considered them idiots. They were not going to leave the car and tried to search other cars in order to find supplies and water. In addition, they were going to get rid of competitors and throw the bodies of dead people down. But they did not see anything wrong with their actions and thought that it was a necessity and the only way to save themselves. There were many wounded people who remained conscious and asked not to kill them. But the men did not stop and continued to make their terrible plan. Suddenly, something happened that no one expected. Just in their direction, at full speed, a new, identical train was moving. People began to flee in panic because it was certain death. Time was up and now the trains collided with each other. After such a terrible blow, no one managed to survive. The main character, together with her new friends, watched what happened and could not believe it. It happened as the guy predicted because all the people were dead. If they had not listened to him, they would have died too. In addition, all the thoughts in his head disappeared. The future that had been predicted had come true, and all the people were dead. It seemed that the professor understood that Seung-ho Yoon had predicted it, and that was why he ordered everyone to leave the train. Despite what had happened, they continued to move on, and a strange feeling haunted him, and he felt very sorry for all the people who had died. But they could not change anything because people had made this choice and now they should concentrate on what awaited them ahead. There were a lot of dead people on the streets of the city and it seemed that they were all infected. Suddenly, strange symbols appeared in the main character's head again. He was to receive a reward for his survival if he held out for a while. Now it was necessary to understand how the bridge managed to get to the ground and capture conscious people. Suddenly, they saw police officers who were trying to help people and were evacuating the population. They hurried to go down and try to reach them. When they went down, they started running in their direction. But everything was not so simple, because the police officers did not want to let them inside. The people tried to convince the military that they were healthy. The police officers did not trust them, so they were going to call their own doctors to do an examination. Suddenly, the main character saw a vision again. If they went down, they would die. But it was very hard to believe, because there was an underground shelter below, in which there were a lot of people. He became scared and he hoped that other people also received this notification and saw the vision. Now he tried to convince people not to go down because he believed that it was dangerous there. Suddenly he noticed that the professor took his side and also did not want to go down. It is clear that Byung-jun Kim also received the notification, but how was such a thing possible at all? Suddenly, something happened that the hero did not expect at all. Byung-jun Kim hit him right in the stomach. In fact, it was impossible to tell anyone about the vision because then the future would change. A special shelter was set up in the subway where there were a lot of people. Also, there were many doctors who tried to save the injured, but due to the lack of tools, many people died. It was possible to restore communication, and now people could call their relatives and tell about what happened. Soon, the ritual army, which is engaged in the destruction of mutants, should help. Suddenly, an urgent news broadcast began. In the morning, incomprehensible flying objects appeared in the sky. After their appearance, cases of infection with an incomprehensible disease began. Martial law was introduced in the country, and the army tried to stop the epidemics. A lot of information appeared about the victims and that the alien creatures that invaded the planet were to blame. The government ordered everyone to stay in safe places and not to come into contact with others in order not to get infected. No one could believe that everything was really happening and that what happened could be true. The school children thanked their classmate for having warned them. After all, it was he who forced everyone to go down to the shelter even before the epidemic became known. Moreover, he insisted that everyone go down and did not allow anyone to refuse. It was thanks to him that everyone could now feel safe and bring everyone who was at school with them. They were grateful to Taiju for being able to foresee the disaster and bring everyone to a safe place. His classmates shouted his name and considered him a hero. The others got angry with them because they shouted so loudly that they could not even talk on the phone. If the woman heard them again, she threatened to tear out her tongue. Across from them sat a group of young people whom they had never seen at school before. The principal was a real bully and had only recently appeared at their school. His father was a very influential person, so any actions could go unpunished for him. Next to him sat a girl named Yerim. Earlier, the girl was shown on TV, and she studied at a neighboring school. Now, she tried to call her parents, but no one answered. The guy promised that a rescue team would come for him soon, and the army had already started moving. And the fate of the other students who went home after school remained unknown to everyone. Earlier, they had tried to warn them about the danger and force them to take shelter. But despite this, most refused and went in another direction, not wanting to sit in the subway. No one knew what would happen next. Would it really be a war and all the boys would be taken to the army? But Yerim tried to find Seung-ho Yun, whom she hadn't seen for a very long time. She described his appearance and wanted the boys to try to get to know him. There were students from other classes in the shelter, so there was hope that he was there. The girl was sure that he came to the shelter and it was necessary to meet him for survival. The boy tried to rest and recover from the operation and saw terrible visions again. She didn't give him peace, and he couldn't understand what it all meant. Far away from him, he saw a strange white portal into which an unknown hand was pointing. This vision repeated itself again, but he could not understand what it meant. What to expect from him? Was it some kind of sign and he needed to understand something? The doctor did not leave him and noticed that he woke up. The girl left the ward to call her own family again, and the doctor just waited and calmly played on the phone. Also, the guy could not understand why he hit him. Was he hiding something much more? However, now Beomjin-kin was sure that he had not managed to completely get the parasite out of his body. The parasites managed to get into his hand. It seemed that the hero did not remember anything at all. The doctor couldn't believe that the boy felt normal. His arm stopped hurting. But the doctor was convinced that he didn't die just because he saw him and the future didn't come true. Also, the man believed that the boy had already died in the past or had seen it in his vision. And then Seung-ho Yun remembered his very first vision. He fell victim to a terrible parasite that took over his body. He remembered how he started to be torn to pieces and he was suffocating. But he could believe that all this could really happen and considered it only visions. Beomjin-kin admitted that he also saw something similar and died 3 times. They were trying to figure out why they were special and were hallucinating, while the others didn't see anything. They had to figure it out as quickly as possible because there was very little time left. He showed him a photo on his own phone of the very timer he kept seeing in his head. These notifications predicted the future, and the numbers meant the time when it would come. There were circles that glowed, most likely attempts that gave or failed tasks. After an unsuccessful attempt or death, the person returned to the same place when they received the message. It was like jumping in time. Also, time could be negative. This meant that they could turn back time and use their attempts to pass the test. It was hard to believe that it was true, but it was worth just thinking about it, and it became clear that everything was not just like that. You could control your time and use it for your own needs. The hero managed to see in front of him an accurate timer with his time to complete tasks. But how did the professor manage to find out about this and understand that they were the chosen ones? That's right, the doctor understood this after he died several times. After death, he saw different options for the future. People from other parts of the city tried to get to the underground storage. There were so many people who wanted to that they all could not fit in the subway car. They started pushing each other because everyone wanted a chance to survive. It was very cramped inside, but no one wanted to give up their opportunity to give place to another. Suddenly, one of them felt very sick, and the mutant that was sitting inside him tried to get to the surface. Now the parasite began to attack new victims, and all people were in danger. A real hell began in the train car. Many people were dying. Nothing could stop it, and very soon all the passengers were dead. Now the parasites, with the heads of their victims, were ready to hunt and find new prey. Byumjin Kin tried to explain that after death, they returned to the past, but the hero did not understand anything at all. But the boy did not understand anything, because if you believe his prediction, they could not go down to the underground storage. Byumjin Kin thought they still had time. The message seemed to be about an underground mine that could not be entered. In addition, Byumjin Kin believed that there were other people who could see the future and predict it. The professor believed that it was necessary to remain silent now, even though the situation was too dangerous. Sung Ho Yoon wanted to tell other people about it so that they would have a chance of salvation. After these words, the professor approached and grabbed his shoulder. In fact, he died every time because he told other people about his plans. In one of the scenarios, they did not go to the underground vault, but went to the streets of the city where death awaited me. That is why he believed that it was not necessary to tell anyone about his visions, and even more so, about his plans for the future. When Sojin Han heard his voice, she entered the ward. She was worried about his health and hand and tried to help. But everything was much better than he thought, because he didn't have any pain at all. Despite the fact that the operation was a few hours ago, he could move his hand. Suddenly, he noticed a blue substance of unknown origin on his hand. Since Sojin Han said that she managed to restore communication, but she couldn't reach her friends and parents. She tried to call her mother again, but this time she didn't answer either. No one wrote anything in the family chat, and she didn't know what happened to her parents. Suddenly, the hero saw a terrible vision again. He saw Sojin Han's father, who was already dead, and she tried to save him without success. He could not believe that this could happen, and tried to come up with a plan on how to stop it. But for this, he needed to go down into an underground mine, which was very dangerous. Moreover, he was very scared for his own brother and mother, whom he had not seen for a long time. So Sojin Han tried to calm him down, because they had to stay strong. She promised to be there and help him, and after these words, he simply burst into tears. The girl was sure that they would be able to overcome any trials and stay alive. Suddenly, they heard a new announcement that a rescue train had arrived at the station. All the residents who were in the shelter had to get to the platform and help pick up the equipment. This was very good news for the main character, because he hoped to see his mother and brother there. He tried to analyze the time he had left and understood that very soon he would face new trials. With the help of this train, he could leave the shelter, but the hope of finding his relatives prevented him from doing so. Everyone who wanted to leave the shelter was ready to board the train. A huge queue of people formed, pushing each other and wanting to get inside as quickly as possible. At the entrance, there were guards and doctors who tried to help the wounded and not let them in. Especially serious patients should have gone on another train. And they started arguing again, and despite the huge number of wounded, everyone thought only of themselves. The professor did not go with them, because he was not going to go down and get on the train. But it was not the end, because he promised to meet them again in the near future. Now the boy understood that the professor did not go with them precisely because of the notification. But if they could get out of the train car before the time ran out, then everything would be fine. But even if he was wrong, he had a chance to go back in time. But then Sojin Han was definitely doomed. Even in such difficult situations, she did not stop supporting him and tried to calm him down. She would never leave him and would support him in any situation. The guy understood what the notification really meant, and now he had to stop the girl. But the train had already arrived at the place and everyone was going to board. He did not want to go and tried to do everything to stop her. The train began to depart with people who entered inside. The guy remained standing at the station next to the girl. He managed to convince her. But she was very sad, and it seemed that there must be a reason why she changed her mind. Previously, he had already managed to save her, so she trusted him and did as he ordered. The second train arrived much faster than they expected. Suddenly, a fire broke out and everything exploded. All the cars caught fire and the people inside died. In addition, along with the train came a new threat, a huge number of parasites, where they found the body of their masters and, having torn off their heads, began to attack people. In addition, there were a lot of them. All the people who went down into the tunnel and wanted to get on the train were in mortal danger. They began to run away, but the monsters killed them one by one. No one managed to escape, and everyone was doomed to certain death. Sung Ho Yoon grabbed the girl by the hand and tried to get to the upper floor as quickly as possible. There were a lot of parasites in the tunnel, which meant that the problem was in the subway itself. Suddenly, he saw that Sojin Han was attacked by a mutant and tried to bite. She was lying on the ground, and he tried to remove it in order to save her. But it was too late because blood appeared on her neck. Monster tried to grab her body, and another mutant was attacking him directly. It happened so suddenly that he did not understand anything at all. His dead body was on the ground. The last thing he saw was a huge number of parasites that were killing people. There were so many of them that they left no chance of survival. He also saw his girlfriend, who was dead. Now his eyes began to close, he was dying. It was the end. The bright light began to blind him. Suddenly, he came to his senses and realized that this was his first death. He moved to the place when they were just getting off the subway and were about to get on the train. Sojin Han was alive and held his hand all the time. He was so nervous that she noticed it and tried to help him. But the hero did not understand anything and did not know where they were. In fact, they were near the main entrance to the vault. Now he understood that it happened exactly as the professor said. He remained alive and went back in time. Seung-ho-yoon began to check her neck. He wanted to understand that everything was fine with the girl. Nothing happened. But she did not understand his words and did not know what injury he was talking about. This meant that they had indeed returned to the past. At the same time, he used one attempt to complete the task. The professor also went through this, and now the boy understood why he had not been careful and did not want to go with him. He met with him again and told him about what had happened and that he had died and returned to the past. This place was not safe, so they did not know where to go and how to escape. Byung-jun Kim suggested that they try to leave this place. They received a notification just at the time they decided to enter the subway. The doctor was convinced that they would not be able to stay here for that long, so they had to find another place. In addition, they needed to find a house with solid walls to feel safe there. Seung-ho-yoon was convinced that they couldn't keep quiet because sooner or later an accident would happen. But most likely, no one would believe their words, or they would think they were crazy. Byung-jun Kim was convinced that even if they knew the future, they didn't need to save people. First of all, they should think about themselves and only then take care of others. On the one hand, Seung-ho-yoon wanted to leave everything as it is, because in any case, people will die. He doesn't mind saving them all, even if there is much more time to complete the task. But he couldn't neglect his gift. He couldn't let Sis Sojin Han die, and he had to do everything to make sure she survived. But he knew that it was necessary to do everything very carefully. After all, soon, his life would end and he would die just like other people. Many people couldn't contact their friends and family. Little children were crying in fear because they wanted to go home, but they couldn't just leave. At the moment when he decided to survive, he realized that all the people here also had families. Each of them wanted to live. Therefore, he couldn't think only about himself and save only himself. A train was about to arrive soon, which would save all the people. The hero tried to warn about the danger that would come from the tunnel. But no one believed his words. People could not understand how the mutants could get inside. They began to consider him crazy and chased him away. The police officers, to whom he also tried to tell about it, chased him away. Sojin Han remembered that in the subway, the main character also predicted what happened. After all, it was he who predicted the disaster. But now he could not tell her everything. He understood that if he did nothing, he would send all the people to certain death. He had to save at least someone, at least as Sojin Han. Suddenly, he met his comrades who hadn't seen him for a long time and thought he was dead. But Seung-ho-yoon didn't understand how they ended up here and where the other guys had disappeared to. He was introduced to Taeju, who knew the main character and knew that he was inside. Taeju was the same as Seung-ho-yoon and could predict the future. However, he didn't know about what happened on the surface. When everything happened, he decided to act and made everyone listen to him. He decided to send everyone to the engine room because it was blocked by thick walls. But Seung-ho-yoon thought there was another way to avoid the disaster. They had to try to convince everyone to believe them. But it wasn't possible, so they couldn't force people to leave the shelter. He wondered why Taeju had come to the shelter and what he saw in his vision. Taeju told him that monsters had started appearing in the subway. He had also been there and died. He tried to understand why they were receiving these notifications about the future. He also had strange dreams, in which there was a strange monster's hand. The dreams were the same as the main characters. They seemed to be related to visions and predictions of the future. Now, the boys were trying to start a fire to force people to leave the subway. Gathering their strength, the guys decided to set fire. Taeju saw his wound. He became curious about what really happened. Seung-ho-yoon replied that everything was fine, he could move it, and it didn't hurt at all. Everything was ready, you can light a fire. No one suspected the approaching danger. But suddenly they heard a strange smell of smoke. After that, the siren started to sound. It was a fire alarm. Smoke was coming from below. Everyone realized that it was a fire. Seung-ho-yoon appeared, who ordered everyone to immediately leave the room and escape. Everyone needed to urgently evacuate to the engine room. Taeju tried to help people get into the room and calm them down. Now, it worked. That way, people can be safe. Suddenly, he noticed a guy who was behaving very strangely. He was running away, pushing everyone in his path. His eyes were a very strange color. It seemed he was also infected. He started running towards the fire, so the guy tried to stop him. If he sees the flames, he will understand everything and then their plan will fail. Suddenly, he was grabbed by the collar of his t-shirt. It was the man he had told about something terrible happening downstairs. Now he suspected the main character and believed that he was involved in what happened. Now he left the hero chained to the wall. He left the man to watch the main character. He himself wanted to gather people in order to put them on the train. The guy couldn't stand it. He told people that they couldn't get on the train because everyone would die. But no one even listened to him. The men considered him sick. Suddenly, the same explosion sounded. As a result, the building began to collapse. A lot of people were under the rubble, doomed to certain death. But as it turned out, it wasn't a train, because there was still a lot of time left before it arrived. The hero couldn't understand what had happened, but it seemed that everything had gone wrong now. People began to wonder why everyone was in the engine room. Many had to visit here for the first time, others had already been in the room before. So Sojin Han was also inside. The guy who was next to her noticed that from the very beginning of the catastrophe, Sung Ho Yun had never been wrong. After all, he had always managed to predict what would happen. It was he who forced people to leave the train and saved their lives. Sung Ho Yun was sure that he knew much more. Inside the engine room was quite spacious, but she couldn't find the main character. The guy wanted to call him, but he didn't answer. Inside the room, she also saw the professor and asked him about her friend. The professor thought that gathering people in the engine room was a mistake and he was trying to start a conversation. But the doctor said that the main character still had some time left and most likely he was helping others. Sung Ho Yun dared to leave the room and wanted to go in search of him. Suddenly, she felt a strong push that knocked her off her feet. The room started to collapse. It seemed like an earthquake had started. She and the professor lay on the ground and the man tried to cover her with his own body. The room began to collapse and people were at risk of being buried under the rubble. It didn't look like an earthquake. It seemed like a loud explosion. Byung-jin Kim was seriously injured. One of the pieces of debris hurt his hand. Sung Ho Yun didn't tell him about the explosion, so it seemed like something went wrong. When the girl heard it, she couldn't believe it because it seemed like the main character was involved in what happened. There was a lot of dust after the explosion. No one could figure out what was happening. It seemed like a pipe had burst as a result of the explosion. But Sung Ho Yun couldn't foresee this in his vision. It seemed like something really went completely wrong. Was it all because of the guy he was trying to stop? The explosion blocked the platform and now people couldn't get to the train. But suddenly they heard very strange sounds. They were mutants. But how could they get into the vault and find people? Now why did you start attacking them again? The men tried to open fire to try to stop them. But there was no point in it. There were so many mutants that even an army of experienced soldiers wouldn't be able to stop them. Sung Ho Yun wanted to be released and have a chance to be saved at least this time. But the man couldn't find the keys and was wasting a lot of precious time. Still, he got scared and left the main character. The guy remained tied to the wall and no one was going to come back for him. The parasite began to catch up with people and seemed not to notice him. Will he die again? Suddenly, one of the mutants saw him and was about to kill him. He rushed at the defenseless hero, whose hands were tied. Suddenly, out of nowhere, Taiju appeared. He came very just in time because he was able to save his life and kill the parasite. Taiju was very surprised when he saw him tied and handcuffed. In addition, he did not have a key because the men who tied him simply ran away. Therefore, Taiju had to try to break the chain with a bat in order to free him. But the other mutants did not let him do this because they also began to approach him. He had to hurry because with every minute it became more and more dangerous. The guy tried, but he did not succeed and could not break the handcuffs. He tried to find another, much heavier object with which he could do it. But everything was in vain, and thus the two of them risked death. Suddenly, he remembered that he had one more life left, and if he died, he would simply return to the past. The guy ordered Taiju to run, and he himself was going to return to the past and start everything from the beginning. But even if he came back again, Taiju didn't want to leave him. Taiju couldn't just leave him and save his own life. He wasn't even going to listen to him, and was going to stay with him until the very end. Taiju was a former baseball player. Sung Ho Yun understood that he hadn't changed at all, but remained so honest and kind. He was completely unsuccessful and couldn't free Sung Ho Yun. It was worth trying to find another way. He didn't even notice the monster starting to attack him. Sung Ho Yun understood that the guy would run through him and suddenly, his hand turned blue again. This gave him strength and now, he tore the violators. Fire appeared in his eyes. He couldn't let his friend die. When the guy freed himself, he prepared to strike. He bravely rushed forward and began to kill all the mutants who approached them. Flames shone in his eyes, and now he was controlled by some unusual force that allowed him to become much stronger. Bogdan, you tried to bite him, but they couldn't pierce his hand, which wasn't covered in metal. The defense was so strong that the parasites broke their teeth, but couldn't get through his skin. He managed to easily kill them one by one, and his entire hand was covered in blood. Taiju couldn't understand how he managed to become so strong. But it was obvious that something very strange was happening to his hand, because it started to pulse again. Now it looked like a monster's hand, and his eyes were glowing with bright light. The sensations were very strange. He couldn't describe his emotions. Taiju understood that the boy was infected, and right now, the mutant was inside him. But the boy denied any guilt and did not consider himself contagious. Something strange was happening to his hand, and he couldn't describe it. Suddenly, he felt that his head started to hurt unbearably. It seemed like it was just tearing apart, and he couldn't stand this intense pain. Where they stopped, they felt the same and tried to overcome the terrible pain in their heads. Something very strange was happening to the monster because they all suddenly changed their behavior. The main character also heard a strange sound but could not do anything to stop the suffering. Taiju understood that Sung Ho Yun was responding to their screams, which meant that he had a connection with the monsters. But gradually, he began to weaken, and the mutants were ready to attack them again. It was urgent to find a way to stop them. He had an idea, because in his own briefcase, he saw bottles of alcohol. It could be used to cause a fire, and that's what he was going to do. He broke the bottle and threw it directly at the mutants who were approaching him. After that, without wasting time, he immediately answered everything. Everything started to burn, and the fire was very strong. The parasites began to burn alive. There was an unbearable stench around. Very soon, they were all dead and turned into ashes. Other mutants did not risk entering the flames because they were afraid that the same thing would happen to them. It seemed that fire was their weak point because mutants burned in a few seconds. In addition, he understood that his head no longer hurt. The pain passed after the monsters stopped screaming. But he thanked Taiju because he was alive precisely because of him. But how did he manage to find out that the main character was in the vault? The fact is that he died in this very city because the guy tore it with his own hand. But Sung Ho Yun couldn't believe his words. Now he was going to kill him because he wanted to find him before he got infected. Sung Ho Yun tried to persuade him, but the guy didn't want to listen to him. A huge blood stain appeared on the ground. At times, the men tried to open the door and get out of the room, which started to collapse. Finally, they managed to get inside the safe room. The people who were inside tried to understand what was really happening and why such a strong explosion occurred. The fact is that there were a lot of monsters outside, so it was dangerous to leave this place. But Sojin Han knew that the hero was outside. She hoped that the men could see him, and suddenly they recognized the same boy they left to die. When everyone found out that they had left him to die, there was a scream. They accused the main character of causing the fire. Sojin Han couldn't hold it in anymore. She decided to leave the bunker. She calmly walked to the door and decided to find the boy, even at the cost of her own life. The men tried to stop her because it was very dangerous, because there were so many mutants outside. But she didn't obey, so they had to try to hold her by force. As soon as the man touched her, she used her technique and threw him to the ground. Sojin Han did not want to talk to the cowards who threw an innocent boy to certain death and ran away. Suddenly, they heard a knock on the door. Someone was trying to get inside the bunker and wanted to open the door. All the people were scared because they did not know what danger awaited them. Most likely, these were people who remained alive and tried to get inside. Sojin Han wanted to open the door, but the sound was very loud. Suddenly, the man shot at the door. He forbade the girl to open it and ordered her to leave. And if she did not obey, then he was ready to shoot her. If she touched the door and tried to escape, he would kill her without hesitation. People were amazed when they realized what the man was ready to do for his own benefit and survival. Now, most people were also convinced that there were many people outside and that the door should be opened. They condemned the man for his act and that he was ready to kill the girl. It seemed that they had made a mistake when they decided to come to the bunker because now they were trapped and could not leave the premises. Yerim could not calm down. She tried to convince herself that Sung Ho Yun was really alive and inside the bunker. Sojin Han asked the people to let her open the door because they had no doubt that the boy was there. The man was not going to do this because he had seen with his own eyes how the boy died. The doctor came to her defense, forcing him to hide his weapon because the girl was just a child. Byumjin Kin also tried to calm her down, but she wanted to go try to find him. He tried to explain that the guy died if there were mutants outside because she saw with her own eyes what was happening in the subway. The probability of surviving in such a difficult situation was very small, so the guy most likely died. Even after his words, Sojin Han did not believe it. She could not accept his death and continued to scream. The evil detective could not hold back anymore. He was ready to take a radical step. Yerim approached him and tried to put away the weapon. But as soon as she touched him, the man realized that he could not resist because it was too strong. And when he looked at her, he realized that her eyes were emitting a strange light. She was looking straight at him and repeating the same words. She was convincing him that it was his duty to help other people and that he needed to open the door right now. After that, the man repeated what she had told him. Such hypnosis took a lot of strength from her. Well, after that, she almost lost consciousness and just fell to the ground. Ilwoo was very scared for her and wanted to help. He wanted to take her to a safe place so that she could regain her strength. But Beomjun-kin saw with his own eyes how the color of her eyes changed. Many people were not satisfied with the work of the detectives and the fact that they were ready to kill a defenseless girl. And the man, who fell under the influence of hypnosis, did not stop repeating the same words. Suddenly, he approached the door and tried to open it. His behavior was very unexpected and his friend tried to stop him. But he did not succeed and the detective still managed to open the door. Everything was quiet outside and there was absolutely no one there. But who was knocking on the door all the time and trying to get inside? They did not notice the monster that was hiding above their heads and was preparing to strike. The detective was the first to die. The monster tore his head into pieces. The other couldn't believe his eyes and remember what made him open the door. It was really dangerous outside and there were mutants waiting for them. The man had to run away, trying to protect his life. And the mutants, one by one, began to get inside and kill all the people. Panic began, people and monsters screamed. Yerim felt that her head hurt terribly. Ilwoo didn't leave her and protected her from the mutants who were approaching. He managed to find a weapon and thanks to this he managed to kill them one by one. But killing the mutants was not so easy because it was necessary to crush their heads. However, this did not stop him and he was ready to protect her to the very end. One of the monsters managed to get closer to him. He threw him to the ground and began to drag him along. The parasite climbed onto him and began to bite. He called for help, but none of the guys dared to approach him and save his life. Another monster appeared, which wrapped itself around his neck and began to strangle him. Now, with the help of its own claws, it tried to open his mouth. And the other monster, taking this opportunity, was going to get inside, wanted to penetrate his body and establish control. At the last moment, a professor appeared who was able to save his life and destroy the monster with one blow. He was so strong that he managed to do it with his bare hands. He killed another with a stone he found in a pile of rubble. Ilwoo helped him up and made sure that the boy was not hurt. When it was all over, Ilwoo's friends came to him and helped him up. But where were they before? It was at that moment when he really needed her help. They were no longer his friends and he realized who they really were. But that was not the end, because they heard other mutants. A whole army of monsters began to approach them through the open door. The police tried to stop them, and other people used ordinary sticks. The doctor understood that they had no chance of salvation, so he would have to go back in time again. But someone had alcohol, and just at that moment threw 2 bottles at the mutants. They crashed, and now it could be set on fire. A fire broke out. The mutants could not get inside because they were very afraid of the flame. It was obvious that this was their weakest point, because the creatures died in the flames in just a few seconds, and the others did not dare to approach. The flames began to weaken, and people prepared for a new wave of attack. Suddenly, they saw Seung-ho Yun, who was moving in their direction and was able to save all the people. Surprisingly, he managed to survive and even save people. No one could believe their eyes. He managed to escape just when Taiju wanted to kill him and return to the past. He tried to convince him not to do it, but he thought that was the end. He closed his eyes but realized that he remained alive and there was only a stain of blood on the ground. Taiju allowed him to stay alive and killed the mutant who was next to him. To do this, he asked him to wrap his arm around his waist so as not to attract attention. But he could not calm down because he could not stop thinking about the fact that Taiju died because of him. His words simply haunted him, and Taiju explained that in the future, he became an uncontrollable monster and destroyed everything in his path.